to the June ordinary meeting of council. Thank you for attending. Attendances, apologies and approved leave of absence. We have an apology from Councillor Coughlin. Do we have any applications for leave of absence?
Yes, please. I'd like to apply for a leave of absence in the August meeting, please, as I'll be overseas.
I've done it again, haven't I?
Well, no, actually.
We'll do it now, Councillor Scandal. So do I have a second of Councillor Scandal's? Councillor Matheson,
Thank you.
Also, could I ask that the attendances of apologies and approved leave of absence? Oh no, we can't do that. Yep, that's a different thing. Sorry, my apologies. With that, all those in favour? Unanimous.
No.
Thank you.
You did not.
He's going to Scotland. He's not taking me with him.
Yeah, Councillor Fullerton, that is not a reason to vote against an item like that. Thank you, Councillor Fullerton. Declarations of interest. We have a declaration of interest from Councillor Langley on item 7.1.1, actions performed under delegated authority for the month of May. The nature of the interest is the Thomas Langley is the applicant on that item, and he will abstain. No, that's not correct.
No.
It's a proximity interest, Councillor Langley. Thank you. An interest from Councillor Skender on 7.4.2. The airport operator warning. The nature of Councillor Skender's interest is his impartiality. Is impartiality as the extent of the interest is the co-author is his partner. Thank you. Public question time. Questions taken on notice from previous minutes. We have none. We have no questions from the public. No, thank you. Confirmation and receiving of minutes from the ordinary meeting of council 24th of May. Do I have a mover? Councillor Vanderloo. Councillor Skender seconded that. Is there any debate on that or comments? There being none, is there any debate at all? None at all. That's adopted unanimously, Mr. Sill. Thank you. We need to receive the minutes of the Community Growth Fund, 17th of June 2022. Councillor Skender, Councillor Vanderloo. Is there any debate on that one, Councillors? A comment?
Sure, I have a question to the chairman of that particular committee. I know that there was a raft of applications, but in point of fact, only a few got through. Was there any particular theme or reason why some did and some didn't?
I'll defer an answer for that to the Vice Chairman of the committee, which I believe is Councillor Skender, who was at that meeting. I was absent, unfortunately. Were you not?
No.
Someone else?
I was it.
Councillor Mazen?
I do, yes.
Defer to Councillor Mazen.
There was a matrix given out, and I think it was due to a variety of reasons, but mainly they were filled out either incorrectly or they'd gone in under another auspice like the Gascoyne Food Council or something like that, applying for I think it was an Italian weekend that they wanted to put on, but they put it under the Food Council. Food Council already been given 10 grand. So they didn't see a reason why they should extend it further. So that was part of the note to the Shire officers was to go back to those that weren't successful and to advise them not only that they weren't successful, but how they could do it better. So I think that's been the case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, is there any further debate on that? There being no debate, I'll declare that as unanimous. Thank you. Item 5, announcements by the President without discussion. There is none. 6, petitions and presentations and memorials. There is none. So I'll refer you to the departmental reports, councillors. Item 7.1.1, action performed under delegated authority for the months of May and June. So that's Councillor Maslin. Councillor Vandeleur, seconded. Councillors, is there any debate? There being no debate, that is adopted unanimously. Thank you. Item 7.2.1, creditors' report of accounts paid under delegation for the month of May. I'll move it, please. Councillor Vandeleur. Councillor Ferreira, seconded. Once again, councillors, is there any debate on that item? There being no debate, that's unanimous. Thank you. Item 7.2.2, the draft financial activity statement for the month of May. Councillor Fullerton. Councillor Vandeleur. Councillors, is there any debate?
So thank you for that. I do, this is a note, and it's not directed at our staff, but rather at state government. I understand they've got teething problems with the Office of Auditor General. However, we're now technically 12 months behind in our balances, so no fault of our own. And I compliment our staff. It's a wonderful place for us to be, but I do protest most strongly that state government set up some practice and wonder where the ramifications are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fullerton. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any further speakers for the motion? I take it you do not wish to speak again, Councillor Fullerton?
I see.
Okay, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, Mrs. Hill. Item 7.2.3, intention to impose differential rates 2022-23. Have a mover, please. Councillor Fullerton. And Councillor Vandeleur. Thank you. Councillor Fullerton.
So I have to declare as a legal academic in taxation law that I hate tax. I really do. But it's the cost of good governance. And we have to tax. And if we don't tax, we won't get the rest of our funding. The essential element is that we've got to put in a contribution. We rely 75% on external funding. And without our contribution, we just don't get it. So we simply don't operate. So it's compulsory. As to the differential tax rates, the rates kind of look strange because the valuation basis is different in each case. And we've only got 3 here, 4 being our standard stuff. So I strongly commend this structure. And unfortunately, they look a bit high, but at the end of the day, that's what we've got to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fullerton. Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Fullerton, would you like to close the debate?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you, Mrs. Hill. Councillors, item 7.2.4, amended fees and charges 2022. Got the mover, please. Councillor Vandeleur. Councillor Maslin. Is there any debate, councillors? There's been no debate. I'll declare that adopted unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hill. Councillors, item 7.3.1, temporary overflow camping, Carterville Station, Coral Bay Road, Linden. I have a mover, please. Councillor Vandeleur. Seconder, please. Councillor Fullerton. Councillors, is there any debate? Councillor Vandeleur, would you like to open the debate? If Councillor Fullerton.
I would like to open it and propose an amendment, if I can get councillor Fullerton's support to do so. In relation to point 4, I'd like to leave that largely unchanged, but add the requirement that that is brought back to council for approval. The waste management plan. I think, and my reason for that is, I think this is a good idea and support the proponent in what they plan to do here, but obviously we've got the concern of the waste that this will generate with the limitations of the Coral Bay Waste Facility, and we need to make sure we're in a position where we can accommodate that waste and that plan, or at least that we're comfortable that whether that does go to that facility or not, we need to understand what the negative repercussions might be of that. So,
Thank you, councillor Vandeleur. Is there a speaker against the amended motion?
Not against, but just in relation to that, again, on waste management, number 5, where it says prior to the commencement of the use, a dump point for chemical toilet waste must be provided on site to the satisfaction of the Shire of Carnarvon. That can be remained in there, but maybe in the notes put in there that the applicant may seek alternative waste management with the approval of the Shire. Is that acceptable to the owner?
use that. So,
Basically, it's stating in here, prior to the commencement of the use, a dump toilet for chemical toilet waste must be provided on site to the satisfaction of the Shire of the Carnarvon. So the proponent in correspondence has basically stated that everyone that's staying is going to be self-contained and they don't need a dump point. But after speaking to the planning and what have you, as it is part of the Caravan and Camping Act, but the proponent, unless they can come back with an alternative management plan to sort of police that, so no one's tipping their chemical toilets out in the bush or, that sort of behaviour. But at the moment, it's stating they have to install one before they even get a permit to camp.
or so leave it as it is, but then with the addition of or provide a solution which is acceptable to the Shire.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you wish to add to point 5 or provide a alternative solution?
To the satisfaction of the Shire.
Just want to make sure that you spoke to relevant people and that's satisfactory within the Act. Yep. That there's an alternative. So you can legally have an alternative to a waste dump facility. Yep. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Councillor Skender. Are there any speakers against the amended motion?
Are you happy with those?
I support those.
Do you second them? Yeah.
Are there any speakers against the amended motion? Any further speakers for the amended motion? That being the case, councillors, all those in favour?
Aye.
Unanimous. Councillors, refurbishment of damaged house, A1288. Can you move it, please? Councillor Vandeleur. Councillor Fullerton. Councillors, is there any debate?
No debate on this aside. I'll speak in favour of the motion. After reviewing the information that's provided to us, I'm comfortable with the extension of time being provided to the not the applicant, the owner in question, and hopefully they can come up with a solution in that time frame and rectify the situation.
Thank you. Any speakers against the motion? No speakers against the motion. Any other speakers for the motion? Councillor Vandeleur, would you close the debate, please?
Debate's closed.
Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 7.3.3, Gascoyne Games 2023 hosting. Councillor Maslow, I take it you're moving the motion. Thank you. Councillor Skender, you second. Thank you. Is there any debate, councillors?
Just to move that it's definitely October, not September, as in the.
In the motion itself?
It's definitely should be October. not
Okay,
September.
so that, can councillors make that, please? Change the word September to October. There being no debate, councillors, I'll declare that adopted unanimously. Item 7.3.4, request for tender for the aquatic centre management. We have two parts to this. One is a simple majority, the other is as well by the looks of that. So,
I move in one block, sir.
do we need to get a vote on that? No, we don't. No, I think so. No, I don't think it's a requirement not to. Councillors, so I have a mover, please. Councillor Forden. Councillor Vanderler. Is there any debate, councillors? Councillor Forden?
So I speak for this motion, in particular I speak for the owners of BTX Contracting. I've personally known them for more years than I care to remember. And I could testify as to the person's enthusiasm for work. And it's a tough gig. But he's a pretty tough guy. And I know his good lady wife, and she's what might not be known in the chambers, is a headmistress in the school. So I think they're very well qualified for the particular role, and I'll stump my virtue on it that they want the job. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Fullerton. Is there any speakers against the motion? Any further speakers for the motion? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 7.3.5, Wilder advocacy position on the arrangements for management of the volunteer bush fire brigades. And I did read that correctly.
Yeah, no, twice for some reason. I'm not guilty.
That's all right. I have a mover, please. Right, Councillor Pereira. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Vanderler. Councillors, is there any debate on this item? There being no debate? Councillor Fullerton, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I'll speak against the motion, sir. Wow, this is a hot potato. This is a hot potato. There's a whole raft of unintended consequences, particularly driven at CEOs of local governments. And there's a range of, I can see unintended consequences, none of them good. And I would keep this in yardstick. The last bushfires that we've had here that I've had experience with, 2010 and 2020, I think, from memory, correct me if I'm wrong. DFIS were here in a heartbeat. They've got a large organisation, lots of money behind them. They're more than well equipped, in my opinion, to deal with the problems. Okay, they take a little while to do it, but personally, I'm well away from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fullerton. Are there any speakers who spoke against it? For the motion. Any further speakers against the motion? Councillor Ferreira, would you like to close the debate? Councillor Fullerton.
Yeah, debate closed.
Thank you. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Yeah. It's staying there.
Huh?
I'm just Councillor Fullerton's got me a bit stumped by his sort of speaking against it when it's basically saying that a clear pathway for local governments to transfer responsibility for the management of bushfires to state government,
The debate.
which is defect.
Four,
Four, isn't it?
5-4.
No, we haven't got mine. Only got-
Recount.
Do it again.
Do it again.
4, those 4,
I'll go.
unanimous, thank you.
Councillor Mazel's argument was concise.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
I think-
Councillor Thornton.
Councillor, I think we should maybe read our agenda items a bit better.
Or we should speak against arguments.
Yes.
Before we go to the vote.
Well, I did ask.
Yeah, I thought everyone understood it. I thought that's odd.
All right. Okay, councillors, 7.4.1, request the closure of public access way, Hammond Street, Carnarvon. Councillor Mazel. Seconder, please, Councillor Fullerton. Any debate, councillors?
I'll just like to speak for, well, basically after discussions with the Shire officers, I understand they've heard the concerns of the applicant and that there will be some obstruction put at the end of that right of way to limit unwanted motorbikes and traffic. So yes, I understand that why they can't close it permanently because it restricts development on those 2 lots. So thank the officers for their time and consultation with Mr. Alexander, and hopefully those barriers can be put in sooner than later. So speak for the recommendation.
Thank you, councillor Mazel. Are there any speakers against the motion? I'll give you time to think, councillors. There being no speakers against the motion, any further speakers for the motion? No further speakers, put it to the vote. All those in favour? Aye, that's unanimous. Item 7.4.2, councillors, I would like to move, and I'll
Excuse me, sir, that motion confidential item.
no,
No, it's just a schedule of conflict.
the schedule is confidential.
Declaration as well.
Oh, thank you, councillor. Standing a declaration on this item. But you can stay in the room and take part in the process. So the motion I'm putting forward is as per on the TV, but the officer's recommendation, the first part, stays the same, except I've changed the word airport operator to aviation operator up the top there, which makes more sense. And then part A will read, issue a formal and final warning to all aviation operators accessing airside at Carnarvon Aerodrome to comply with the Carnarvon Aerodrome safety compliance requirements and any reasonable direction by the Shire as aerodrome owners. B, request that the aviation operator noted in confidential schedules 7.4.2 A, B and E show due cause as to why council should not terminate by default any existing lease. Councillors, I'll put that forward. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor.
Motion to suspend standing orders, please. Just to, got a few questions in relation to that. It might get a bit messy if we don't go down that path.
Yeah,
Okay.
well,
Who's second?
I'll second it.
Second? Okay.
Councillor Vanderleer moved that we suspend standing orders. Councillor.
You're second to his vandalism.
You're going behind closed doors? Or
The schedule on this item is confidential. Are you going to discuss anything in the schedule?
Just your motion.
Just my
specific
motion?
wording of the motion.
Okay, so no, I think we can stay where we're at. So, okay, so you've seconded Councillor Vanderleer,
Mhm.
thank you. Councillor Vanderleer.
The question I've got is in relation to the term final. is one question. So the first part of the motion is issue a formal and final warning to all aviation operators. I agree with the formal warning part. So I'm just how far are we going to take the final part of the warning part, considering this is a blanket warning? Does that mean the next person that puts a foot out of line and
Will be breached.
will be breached? And what does the finality of that warning mean to that person that breaches?
Well, anybody that doesn't comply will breach the safety regulations, and I'm pretty sure in what I'm saying, there is a process to follow where that breach is taken to the Aerodrome Safety Committee, Safety Management Committee, and the actions that will come from assessing the breach will be decided there on the advice of the relevant authority being CASA.
Would that read that? Sorry, you go to that.
Just while you was on it, the committee, who, is that a local committee? Is that,
It's a local committee at the aerodrome.
Yep.
Which should, you're testing from
that's right.
All operators on the airport are usually part of that committee, as well as a rep from the aerodrome management, the guys that usually do your yearly audits, and sometime a rep from CASA will attend.
And they meet often, monthly, yearly?
Quarterly.
Would that read better, essentially saying issue a formal notification to all operators that any future breaches will be referred to XYZ as you just said, rather than a formal and final warning? We're more or less notifying them that the pathway that we're going to manage breaches going forward is different, or we're going to follow the steps that you've outlined there. Do you think? Issue a formal notification. We're putting everyone on notice that this is how we manage going forward.
Given the information provided in the schedules, I think there is fairly strong evidence that there are a number of operators not complying or not on differing occasions. So by issuing a formal and final warning, but there's not going to be any more warnings, you will be reported. And I think that that's one strong way of supporting the fire staff in trying to get everybody to comply with the regulations. I'm quite sure most of the operators, in fact, I'd be surprised if all the operators didn't know the ramifications of not complying.
Right.
So they're well aware of that. So I'm comfortable with the issue of formal and final warning, because there won't be any more warnings. You will be reported.
Well, should we stipulate then what the ramifications of a warning are?
They know what the ramifications are.
Is the ability to just issue a fine rather than trying to terminate that lease?
This is in relation to B.
If you,
I'm talking
if you
about, no, I'm not talking about breaching the lease. That if the leaseholder there is in default of the lease and has a history of not trying to rectify the position, then the request to show due cause as to why we should not terminate the lease being in default, I think is the best way forward, because there is a history of defaulting the lease.
that default is not paying financial on time, or is that safety breaches?
We're going into
I'm separate.
confidentiality.
Yeah, we're going into the confidential part now, so.
Can we add the second part of your argument to the line to section A, which outlines very briefly what the consequences of future breaches are? Which is that we referred to, future breaches will be referred to the pathway you just mentioned, because I'm not well versed in airport safety requirements and the process for managing breaches, and it didn't take long to say, and I think it would clarify it nicely for anyone like myself.
I think I would have to take that on notice, because it's been a while since I've been at the airport. I don't know what has changed in that area.
But in relation to the safety board, the board,
Safety Management Committee,
the safety management
Yeah.
committee will manage all any future breaches will be referred to the safety management committee to be
I think
handled,
it's
assessed.
putting, yeah, it's giving you a pathway that may not apply every time.
Well, I think that's giving a pretty open-ended pathway that anyone could be booted off the airport at any time for any breach ever. I don't think that's
That is the case though. The aerodrome managers, if someone is breaching airside safety, has the authority under the regulations to remove that person from airside.
well, then that's different to what you just said. in the
No,
first
but
instance,
that is a possibility that they can use.
We'll see, we've managed to get confused over it. Well, I'm confused as to
Yeah,
what the ramification of the breach.
I think what we've got to do, in a minute, councillor, what we've got to do is back up the current aerodrome reporting officers and the Shire staff that are managing the aerodrome. Their role is well laid out, speaking in the regulations. I think if we complicate this too much, it's going to further question our actions. I'm trying to leave it open so that we're not dictating the role, the operational role. We've got to be careful we don't
So
do
why are
that.
we considering it at all then? Why has it come to us? If we're not dictating the operational role? Because that was my first instance, my gut feel and reading this the first instance is this
Yeah.
feels operational.
Yeah.
So,
Backing up our staff trying to deal with a problem.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
that's why this motion, I don't like it at all, because if we, whatever way we go, it's creating a complex situation. If we support the motion as it stands, we're potentially
Do you want to
alienating.
bring that up when you go back into chambers?
Well, I want to iron out I want to better understand what that motion is doing, how we've changed it, how you're proposing to change it, and what that means. Because issue a formal and final warning to all aviation operators. That's quite a blanket, that's
Yes,
quite a
yes.
severe measure taken. I don't understand what that means if someone is in a position of breach. I might be the only one at the table that doesn't understand that, but I don't know what that means.
I'd also add that point B. I don't understand, like, that's basically worded that we will breach that specific aviation operator unless he shows due reason why we don't.
No, we're not breaching him. We're asking him to come and talk to us
Yeah.
in relation to his lease.
But it says, otherwise we will terminate.
Show cause.
So
Should show
you
cause
can't-
as to
you
not,
can't justify it.
as to not to terminate his lease. He's got a lease that is in default. So the question, and he's got a history of default, so the question is, come and talk to us. It's not telling him we're going to get rid of it. It's asking him to tell us why we shouldn't.
Yeah, because default is it will be terminated. If he doesn't justify appropriately why it shouldn't be terminated.
Mhm.
So the current stance of that. I
I'll
believe-
answer that question when we go back into it.
Do that.
Okay, so what councillor Vanderloo is looking for is some clarification as to what that final warning actually entails. So you get a final warning, and then what? Is that what you want clarification on?
Then what? Well, the aerodrome staff will take the course of action laid out in the standards of operating an aerodrome. And the standards include all the safety standards of the aerodrome. So that's laid out in those standards. It's a document about that effect. But that opens the door for them to not understand they've got this, the Shire or council has their back if they have to take action.
Okay,
Thank you. Any other questions?
sorry.
Councillor Fullerton, you have your hand up.
I'll leave Councillor Vanderloo's finished.
I'll finish.
The 3 points. I agree almost entirely with Councillor Vanderloo's reasoning, logic and rationale. Secondly, why a warning and not a breach right now? And thirdly, due to the complexity, should we not defer this motion until we can address the issues raised by councillor Vanderler and defer it to point of fact to the next meeting?
You may do so when we go back into chat. I put it up as an alternative motion, well, a new motion, sorry. You may vote it down.
Right, okay. A foreshadow a motion.
Not yet, you can't.
You can't. We've got to go back into standing orders.
Yeah, but then I'll foreshadow the motion.
Okay.
I make a motion, we go back to standing orders regime.
Councillor Maslin seconded that. All those in
Yeah.
favour?
Aye.
Unanimous, thank you, Mr. Wilkes. Councillors, I've put a motion up. I'll open this by,
So may I foreshadow a motion before you address me? I've got it written down, Mrs. Hill, would you like me to pass it to you?
So I'll,
Okay. Due to the complexity of this issue, should we not defer this motion until we can address the issues raised by councillor Vanderler and defer this matter until the next meeting?
thank you, Mrs. Hill. Councillors, I'll just draw your attention back to the comments in the agenda. There's a comment here that breaching the safety compliance requirements and not following reasonable instructions of airport staff, and therefore breaches of the existing, I won't talk about the lease because I'm not talking about the lease, but there is a consistent and constant display of not complying with regulations at the airport by this aviation operator. To reduce the chance or the opportunity for this operator to accuse the council of not applying regulations fairly across the board of all operators at the airport, because all operators at one time or another, well, especially the not very professional ones, breach safety standards at the airport. These safety standards are put in place because Australia's got an enviable position in the aviation world. We have the best safety record of any country with our aviation. And that's because we set standards, which are basically these safe rules to operate at an aerodrome. When you get someone that consistently and constantly breaches these standards, what other standards are they breaching? And there are many. Because when you do sit down and watch and take note, there are many being breached, which includes low flying in a takeoff display area of a runway, which concerns me greatly. So if you're willing to breach the simplest rules, what else are you breaching? So we've got to show some strength in the staff. Now, I can't remember exactly what the standards say and the process, but there is a process to follow. And I understand that the staff at the airport are following that process. But they want some support because this person is nothing but a bully. I'm happy to say that because that's exactly what's happening. When you read this, but he's been good enough not to claim that he hasn't not complied. So I'm putting forward this as a way of supporting Carnarvon Shire's staff in trying to apply the safety standards at the airport. Full stop, end of story. And that's what it's about. They know what their job is. They know what the process is. Once someone breaches, it is an ideal time to ensure that Nobody feels like they've been singled out or bullied. So we warn all operators. It's a standard thing to say to people, you must comply. If you don't comply, we're liable to have an accident or somebody gets hurt. I don't want to see that happen. I really don't want to see it happen. The second thing is, I've separated the lease issue from the previous officer's recommendation as if this goes to CASA, which it will eventually will, CASA will throw it out if we're discussing a lease in it because it's got absolutely nothing to do with airside safety. CASA want to talk about airside safety. But the agenda item from the officer leading to the officer's recommendation spoke of the non-compliance with lease conditions. And they're ongoing and have been for a long time. So what better way than to sort that out is ask the person to come in here, sit down and talk to the Shire about how can he rectify these lease issues. And that's basically what the question here is. So with that, people, and it doesn't impact the safety standards. So, and therefore, CASA won't be interested and it doesn't matter. So with that, councillor, I'd ask you to support the motion. Thank you. Any speakers against the motion, councillors?
Having fun today, aren't we, chaps? I concur absolutely that section B, as to the points of the lease, are separate. Absolutely. I don't know how we can separate that out, but I don't believe that that's got anything to do with the matter in issue. However, I concur absolutely with the President's statements as to safety. And I had an uncle who was an aircraft crash investigator. And so I'll tell you now, which we know, the rules have been made by dead men. Thousands of people died in aviation so these rules can be done. And I've been known to be a bit of a cowboy myself, but I've got to tell you, when it comes to the air, there's no room for cowboys. There's no cavalier attitudes. And what might appear to be a very trivial thing could be the tip of the iceberg. And Captain Smith will be able to tell you what happens when you ignore that. But given the extreme consequences of not following instructions and recommendations of the manufacturer or operator can result in severe injury or death. And that's on a placard on most aircraft that I've ever been in. And because of the nature, I really, really want to examine this deeper. And I'm sorry to the staff to defer it, but I really, really want this to be voted down, or at least part A to be voted down, so that we can examine this more clearly and I would brief the person. Thank you. But that's future.
Thank you, councillor Fullerton. Do I have any further speakers for the motion?
Can I just ask a question? Please, are the, and it might be one best directed to Mr. Nielsen, are the contract breaches, should we call it, the contract breaches that the President was referring to, are they the safety issues that we've read about, or are they something else? The lease condition, the breach of the lease conditions? I just didn't remember.
Through the chair, so page 50.
50, yep.
In the comment section, so in addition, the operator leases a portion of land at the airport. That lease specifically requires compliance with airport requirements as follows. And that's a blanket type statement then around the Aviation Transport Security Act, the Civil Aviation Act, the requirements of our Shire of Carnarvon Airside Safety Management System policy, and all reasonable security directions by ourselves as the or the airport manager.
Okay.
So the requirement to be identified airside, failing to be identified airside is a breach of the Aviation Transport Security Act, if I recall.
Yep.
correctly.
It is.
And for clarification, and a breach of it, therefore a breach of the lease.
Correct.
Just speak. So basically, I've supported Councillor Smith's motion, but after sitting and listening to both sides of the floor, I do believe that there's two separate issues here in regards to the safety and the lease. So therefore, I'm starting to think that this needs to be brought back, and two issues need to be separated, and all councils need to be brought up to speed in regards to the lease issues and also the ramifications of what, and clarification of what that final warning will entail if it's been ignored from here on in.
I'd like to speak against the motion. I've written this down so I can get it out. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the high vis is an important safety measure and should be enforced by the Shire. However, when viewed in the context of multiple other breaches of communications highlighted by the aviation operator, I'd consider them far greater concern. So that's probably more related to against the Shire.
Sorry, say that last bit.
About the communications issues about when people were on the tarmac fixing the fence and no one got back to him when he was landing. So breach of communication protocols. I think if we issue a formal and final warning to all operators, the issue that may arise in the event that an operator doesn't wear a high-vis vest in the future, and this may be an innocent mistake by any operator, the termination of any lease or license as a result is, in my view, far too drastic measure. We should acknowledge the critical service the aviation business currently provides for our community and do everything we can as a Shire to support them. One idea would be to potentially propose any future breaches a fine be imposed and or terminations pending the severity of the breaches, of which not wearing a high-vis vest is not considered a serious breach to warrant termination of any lease or licence. However, a fine is definitely worth being imposed.
Are there any further speakers for the motion?
Would, it's another question to yourself, Mr. President. Would you consider splitting these two items?
As I've written this, I consider it a split, and I'll explain why in a moment.
So we will vote on A and B separately? Or
No, you can, if you wish to, you can move an alternative motion to separate them. I've written it down as one because they become two different items. The request for in regards to the lease, I have not included the breaches of entering airside because anybody can breach entering airside from anywhere. And that's just a simple statement of fact. The accessing airside without following the safety management systems policy is the problem. And that policy also lays out what you do going forward if you've breached for not following the safety standards legislation.
I guess my question is do you think there's scope to, say, carry out A and have the desired impact of that being that that's going to rectify B, because essentially the warning is to comply or else?
I think the leasing issues are further complicated. But I think a quick way of fixing the leasing issues is to get him in here talking to the Shire staff.
I'd agree with that. So, stand up. I think communication between the Shire and the aviation operator is key, but not under the premise of what point B is that it will be terminated unless he can show due cause.
Okay. Can I just respond to a couple of things with that? As I said, with the lease issues, they've used the lease to try and get this operator to comply with airside standards. Right? It's probably a mistake. It shouldn't have been done. The breaching on the lease is a bigger problem than accessing airside. So I've included it here because it was included in the original motion. I didn't want to change it too much, but that is a separate item altogether. going back to a couple of things you said, Councillor Langley, that the people working airside on the fence line were breaching airside safety. They were not. At any time were they breaching airside safety.
Another comment.
Was that he didn't respond? They didn't respond? They didn't have to. It's quite normal for that to occur. They were outside of the airside strips, the runway strips. They therefore were outside of the safety area. They weren't, for the better part of the job, they weren't even airside. So you've got to be a little bit careful with that one. When they were working on that fence, they were not inside the runway strips. So if they were inside the white cones that go around the runway strips, they have to comply with all standards. They weren't. They were well outside of those areas. So would they have been having someone sit and monitor the radio the whole time? No. So there's also a history of, and it hasn't been documented here, but there's a history of the operator not making radio calls on departure, etc. So as per the discussion this morning, there's always two sides to every story. But there is two sides to every story because those departures were recorded. So it's critical to understand that some of the stuff is emotional and not quite factual. Any further questions or speakers for or against?
Can I put this as a question? Would that not then substantiate the argument for deferring the motion?
No, I don't think so. No.
I'd just like to speak for the motion. Just sitting back for a while and letting people discuss it. Couple of points. Obviously, there's an issue at the airport, and there's personalities, etc. We've got an ARO, a manager, an executive, and a CEO, and whether it's the same person or an acting CEO have brought this to us. Obviously, there is a big problem down there. I don't believe the problem is small enough or it's not insignificant, so I think it needs to be addressed today. Therefore, I don't support deferring it any longer. I think it needs to be addressed right now. And reading A and B, to me, it passes a pub test, really. When you just sit back and read A and B, I don't think that they're not unreasonable. The issue of issuing a formal and final warning, that can have great ramifications, but those ramifications are great because of the importance of safety at that particular site. That's why I think, and thinking about that needs to stay, regardless of what the ramifications are, whether it's a lease or anything. I don't think anything comes before safety, including a lease. So that's why I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further speakers against the motion? There being no further speakers against the motion, I'll...
Mr. President, did the opportunity to speak for the motion?
Councillor.
I'd like to, I think I support A lot because it makes sense to. It's hard to disagree with A. Issuing a warning to all operators. It's clear that this person has a breach, and it's clear with the evidence that's been supplied to us that there are multiple instances of breaches from that operator and other operators. So to put everyone on notice that this is going to be taken seriously going forward is a reasonable move to make. And in follow-up to my question, while standing orders were suspended, I do follow the President's logic that obviously the path that will be followed will be the path that is outlined in the standards, requirements, regulations, or whatever that may be. So we don't need to spell them out as I had previously requested. And in relation to B, I'd like to see that play out in a way where the operator and the Shire discuss this situation, because this is obviously about one operator in particular. And I'd just like to see this play out in a way where the operator establishes a commitment to work with the Shire moving forward in a compliant way. But most of all, what I'd like to see is it's clear reading the documentation and the schedules that we were provided, that this is a breakdown in relationship, in communications. It's at some point halfway between those emails. A lot of the problem, I suspect, is that this stuff is conducted on email in the way it is done, so there's not room for the intricacies of conversation to iron out these problems. They become quite large, and I'd like to see that relationship repaired, because both parties stand to benefit from just working together and creating an environment at the airport where it's safe and
Harmonious. And harmonious.
Harmonious, that's right. So I do support the motion, because in my view, reading it now, it's hard not to.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderloo. Are there any further speakers against the motion? Councillors, you've had your chance. I'll close the debate. With closing the debate, I'll thank councillors for the debate we've had and putting the effort into it. And you're quite right, Councillor Vanderloo, to drill down to the level of what happens once someone is breached. That's an operational issue, it really is, and it needs to be addressed at that level, and I'm quite sure that they're well aware of it. They have policies in place, including safety management systems policies, which are very strong and well written. I can attest to that. I think this agenda item is chasing exactly what we all want. Safe operations at the airport and harmonious working relationships with users of the airport. So with that, I'd ask all councillors to support this motion. Thank you. With that, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Thank you, councillor. I'll refer you back to index. We have applications, we've already done that. Thank you, councillor Skender. Applications leave are absent. Motions on which previous notice has been given. I don't believe we have any. Questions from members without notice. Are there any questions from members? Urgent business approved by the presiding member or by decision of council. There is none. Matters for which the meeting be closed to the public. No matters in that area. The date of the next meeting will be Tuesday, the 26th of July, 2022, commencing at 1 o'clock. And with that, council, I'll declare it closed. Thank you.